You keep dancing with the devil. One day it's gonna follow you home.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Ryan Coogler's Sinners. We are going to go behind the scenes to show you how they made this movie, and then break down all of the hidden symbolism in this epic film. Now, there is a lot to cover, so let's get started. So this obviously is a vampire movie, but also Ryan Coogler has expanded on the idea of what a vampire is. Vampires don't just take away your blood, but they take away your soul. They take away your individuality. So this movie is about vampires that want to steal your cultural soul and make you be just like everyone else.
After we kill y'all, we're gonna have heaven right here on earth.
Coogler shows this cultural vampirism through the lens of music, cultural erasure, and cultural appropriation. And I do not understand any of those words. Well, cultural erasure is when one more powerful group erases the culture of another. One famous example is the overseer in Roots beating Kunta Kinte until he stops calling himself by his African name.
Your name is Toby. You're going to learn to say your name. Let me hear you say it. What's your name?
Kunta Kinte.
But another fictional example is from the show Andor, when the Empire gradually erased the Aldani culture by giving them jobs to economically conform them to the Empire. But in music, here's the best way I can explain cultural appropriation. In 1955, Little Richard released the masterpiece Tutti Frutti. Nobody had ever heard anything like this on the radio before. But for white audiences, especially in the South, he sounded just too black.
White folks say they like the blues just fine. They just don't like the people who make it.
So the record label had Pat Boone record this cover, which turned an authentic black sound into a product that could be consumed by a mass audience. So when I talk about cultural appropriation in this film, I'm talking about this. And the movie also explores how commercial interests exploited other cultures, like the Irish, but we'll talk about that as we go along. And I also want you to notice how the movie is structured like a musical, not just because there are songs, but because those songs obey the simple rules of musicals.
When you're too emotional to talk, you sing. When you're too emotional to sing, you dance.
Throughout the film, when emotions reach a fever pitch, the next song begins as a release that expresses all of the emotions that just came before. And this is also mirroring why people went to these juke joints to begin with.
After a long day of work, they would come and get a cold drink and dance and socialize and be in community.
Annie narrates the opening montage, which is made up of a series of woodcut images. So this style of art is literally hundreds of thousands of years old, going back to the Paleolithic era, and it was particularly popular with mid-century African-American artists in the 1930s, such as Mildred Rackley and Fred Becker. The prologue lets us know about people like Sammy, who could make music to pierce the veil between life and death. But most importantly, Annie lets us know that these people occur naturally in every culture. In the Ireland, there are poets called the Fili, which means seer or one who sees. The Choctaw call them fire keepers because they preserve their oral traditions, stories often told at night around fires. And in West Africa, the oral traditions were kept alive by griots. Now, the title of the movie, Sinners, is cryptic and controversial. Now, we'll discuss it as we go along, but this opening sets up the meaning. Preacher Boy's dad sees the blues as the devil's music, music that leads to sin. And in the juke joint, we do see greed and murder, adultery, envy, anger, and gluttony. So his dad wants Sammy to focus on God's music, hymns like the one that opens the movie. Now, that hymn is about using the talents that God gave you and letting the world see them. In the soundtrack, there's actually a version of this song played by Miles Caton in the style of the blues. So, in his dad's eyes, Sammy is a sinner even though he is using his God-given talent to bring people together in a shared spiritual experience. And this is where we get into the movie's critique of how, throughout history, institutions have stolen the Word of God and used it to gain political and financial control over Native people. One example is the Spanish Inquisition, where the church murdered anybody who stood between them and absolute power. And the movie also draws a parallel with white missionaries. Now, I want to be clear, there have been so many missionaries in the past who are incredibly kind people, who go into impoverished areas with medicine and food, who genuinely want to help. But there were also missionaries that existed as arms of the state, whose primary aim was to erase indigenous cultures and make people conform to the broader economic power of, say, the British Empire. Remick actually says this later in the movie when he says that his people had Christianity forced on them centuries ago.
Long ago,
The man who stole my father's land forced these words upon us.
And in the surreal montage, Delroy Slim tells Preacher Boy,
"Look at the same spirit flow through these church folk, flowing through us. They just flow in a different way."
And then he talks about the magic of the old world still coming from them.
It's sacred.
All of this was originally a deleted scene, but was cut into I Lied to You as a flashback. And just like the vampires and sinners, these missionaries ask to be invited in before converting the locals to their religion. I think that using people's faith for political and financial power is one of the worst sins that you can commit, and that is the sin that the vampires are committing. They want to absorb all music and people into their singular hive mind. But more directly, the title is about Sammy embracing the life of nightclubs and juke joints so he can play music. Later in the movie, Smoke tells him a story about how he and his brother weren't welcome among the proper black folks the next town over, and he tells Sammy to stop playing guitar so he can become an upstanding citizen. And this is setting up Sammy's final decision at the end of the movie. Again, this theme of sinners and saints is revisited over and over again in the movie, and I'll talk about it as we go along. Now, the woodcut ends on the image of two red eyes watching from the darkness, like the eyes of the vampire or the eyes of an animal. And then this fades into an image of the sun and the moon beside each other in the early morning. So this visual sets up one of the movie's running themes of duality. The sun and the moon are opposites that also complement each other. We also have two brothers with opposite personalities. We have the black and white sides of the street, and thanks to Jim Crow laws, the town is split into the white world and the black world. Also, the conflict in the movie is between the living and the dead, or the humans and the vampires. But the most important duality in the movie might just be the church and the Jew. They have, for instance, similar structures, similar rafters, and they're both places where people sing, bringing us closer to heaven or hell, depending on what you believe. The music of the church is concerned with light, but the juke joint is where they sing the blues, which taps into the darkness to make something beautiful.
I don't care, sun don't shine once more, that's what I said.
Then we go to the cotton fields, which were Ryan Coogler's inspiration to make this film. His grandfather picked cotton in Mississippi before he moved to California. It's also important that just 70 years before, these fields were picked by black slaves. As we'll talk about later, they have their constitutional freedom, but the lack of economic freedom has kept them picking cotton in the Jim Crow South. And then we're introduced to the Moore twins in one of the most important shots of the movie. I watched a really good video about this scene on a channel called This Week's Movie, where he talks about how normally the illusion of a twin in a movie is created by bolting down the camera and then having the actor film the scene twice. But notice how this shot uses dynamic camera. In other words, the camera moves, and it is a smooth gliding motion to show the brothers are calm and in control of their environment. And then Michael B. Jordan passes a cigarette to himself. Now, the move is so seamless, you never doubt for a moment that these are two different people. In an interview with the Post Perspective, Coogler reveals that they did this with a techno dolly that recreated the same movement over and over again for multiple takes. Then they used loud beeps so the actors knew where to be at the exact right moment, just like choreographing a dance. Then they digitally layered Michael B. Jordan over his stand-in like they do all through the movie. Not to mention there was the props department who had to make sure that the cigarette was lit at the exact same length for all 17 takes. But this also sets up an important character trait. As we see at the end of the movie, Smoke can't roll his own cigarettes because of his hand tremors, probably caused by PTSD from the war. So Stack has to roll his cigarettes for him.
I need a goddamn cigarette. Come right up.
And when Stack isn't around, Smoke has to smoke a pipe. But this shot is also important because after this moment, it really sells the illusion that Michael B. Jordan is two different people. Every shot was filmed several times, once with Jordan and a stand-in, but then also with Jordan filming with a halo ring. Now this is a lightweight mount of cameras that capture a 360-degree view of Jordan's performance. That way they have every nuance of his face to easier overlay his image on top of his body double, Percy Bell. And to further set them apart, Jordan changed the way each brother stood, the way they walked, and the way they spoke. The makeup department highlights different areas of his face for each character, and the costumes department dressed them in two different colors, red and blue. Stack is wearing red because he's more passionate and flashy, while Smoke is more calm and cool. And there's also an Easter egg on the soundtrack on Spotify under the artist bios. We see headlines about rival gangs in Chicago fighting, and this one about bank robbers making off with a heist. Now the implication here is that the twins robbed a bank and then set the gangs against each other.
Irish beer, Italian wine. You robbed both sides. Let them blame each other while you and Smoke come down here and set up shop.
And their costumes also imply the different mobs they worked for. Stack wears the fedoras of the Italians, while Smoke wears the flat cap of the Irish. And 1931 was also the year that Al Capone was arrested, and this implies that the brothers took advantage of the ensuing chaos to steal what they could and get out of town. Now, the brothers' real names are Elias and Elijah, and they have a biblical meaning. Now, biblical scholars debate whether these two were separate men or just transliterated versions of the name. In the Bible, Elias was said to prepare the way for a greater man. And in the film, Elias was bitten first, paving the way for the better man, Elijah, to be the hero of the movie. Also, Elias means the word of God, like how Elias is a smooth talker.
Y'all ready to drink? Y'all ready to sweat till y'all stink?
And Elijah means the hand of God. In other words, the man who brings God's wrath. Just like in the movie, biblical Elijah is more violent. And in the Bible, Elias also communicated with scavenger birds that brought him bread and meat. And we see the image of 3 birds recur throughout the movie, symbolizing Remick and the other 2 vampires. And finally, the prophet Elias was said to ascend to heaven in a whirlwind of fire, which is what happens to Remick at the end of the film. Now, the juke joint was built on a former golf course in Louisiana that was abandoned after Hurricane Katrina. When the Klansman shows them around, he says that the old sawmill workers used to live upstairs. Now, this is an important detail because it illustrates the economic oppression of the Jim Crow South. Now, following the end of the Civil War, many plantation owners created a sharecropping system where they loaned freed slaves land, money, and equipment, but they made sure the farm never produced enough money to get the workers out of debt. So in effect, they stayed slaves. This is why, later in the movie, people pay with plantation coins. This was a closed system where workers were paid in money that they could only spend at the plantation store. So they were upgraded basically from slaves to serfs.
Right, so basically the same thing.
Workers living in a sawmill is another example of workers not being paid enough to afford their own home, so they're essentially an extension of the business itself. This is just like how the vampires want to absorb everybody into their hive mind, which represents capitalism and the commercialization of art. Now, back at the church, Jedediah wants Sammy to help with this sermon that is about temptation. And this is foreshadowing the final showdown of the movie. The vampires are false gods who promise,
We're gonna have heaven right here on earth.
but rather than succumb, Sammy and the others resist this false promise of eternal life. And then, when he sees his dad again at the end of the movie, Sammy resists temptation again. He could walk away from the blues and live a proper, safe life, but in the end, he chooses to stay a sinner.
I'm a sinner, I'm a saint. I do not feel ashamed.
Now, when Sammy is riding with the twins, he asks about Chicago, which didn't have the Southern Jim Crow laws that kept black people from having basic human rights, like voting, shopping, or just prospering.
You know why that is? Because that son of a bitch, Jim Crow.
They said they returned because they prefer to deal with the devil they know. And this is immediately followed by the rattlesnake in the truck. Notice it has glowing eyes like the vampires, and Smoke kills it, just like he kills Remick and the Klansman at the end of the movie. That is how Smoke treats the devil he knows. Now, the metaphor here is that there is danger lurking in this life in selling booze, but also there's danger in economic prosperity. When they buy the sawmill, they say,
Our own juke joint. For us and by us.
Now, this was the name of a popular black-owned clothing line in the 1990s, but it also shows how in the 1920s and 30s, black people were really trying to gain footholds on the economic ladder. This often resulted in white people limiting black prosperity, sometimes violently, either through the actions of the Ku Klux Klan or when white people dropped bombs on black businesses during the Tulsa Massacre in 1921. And in this movie, we see it with the Klan in the 3rd act. But the brothers' main goal is to build up their community. In town, Smoke doesn't just hire this girl to watch the truck, he teaches her how to negotiate.
See, we talking numbers now, and numbers always gotta be in conversation with each other. You understand? You gotta negotiate.
Even their last name, Moore, implies that they're trying to add more to the economic wealth of their community. And then we meet the Chow family, who reflect the vibrant Chinese community in the South at this time. Following the end of the Civil War, white plantation owners hired an influx of Chinese laborers. In fact, the actors' accents were inspired by a documentary by Dolly Lee, which was about the Chinese who lived in the Mississippi Delta in the 1930s.
There were the whites and the blacks and the Chinese, and we were fine until we crossed over.
When Lisa goes to get her mom, Ryan Coogler gives us a 1-minute, 7-second tracking shot. Now, this is one of several wonders in the film, and Frankly, Coogler is known for these. Creed opens up with a long tracking shot as well. But Coogler doesn't use oneers as a trick. They always highlight an important moment. In this case, it's Lisa leaving the store of black shoppers on the black side of the street and entering her parents' other, much nicer grocery store on the white side of the street. It is a way to once again show the reality and the inequality in the Jim Crow South. And there's even a background extra that calls out this duality.
Used to be what they had their side.
And on the other side of the street, there is a man screaming after being shot. Now, the only color paint that Grace has for the sign is red, which is foreshadowing the bloodbath that happens at the juke that night. So, while Smoke handles the business and violence, Stack is in charge of the entertainment and advertising. He tells Sammy that his guitar belonged to Charlie Patton, the legendary Delta blues player. Now, the guitar is one of the most important props in the entire movie because it represents the life that Sammy wants to live, to be a blues musician, and it's fitting that the guitar was a gift from Stack. So the brothers' sinning lifestyle is rooted in the pain and suffering of a hard life, and that is also where the blues comes from. But the brothers approach Sammy's music in different ways. Notice one of the first things Stack says when he hears Preacher Boy sing.
We won't make some money.
So Stack immediately wants to monetize Sammy's talent, and he's also open to the idea of letting white people into the club later on.
Now listen to me. What if they just came to sing?
Whereas Smoke puts a gun to Sammy's head and tells him to leave the life behind.
Going down Mount Bayou. Live with the proper black folks. Leave all this here improper shit to us.
Again, the movie's central theme here is driven by duality, and here we see it the two different ways the brothers approach this music. Now, the production designer of this movie is Hannah Beachler, and she was the first African-American to win an Oscar for production design for Black Panther, and she is a heavy favorite for the Oscar this year. At the train station, we meet Haley Steinfeld's character, Mary, and just like her character, she is 1/8 African-American in real life. Haley Steinfeld told Refinery 29, "I was constantly thinking about my situation, my family, my ancestors, and my grandfather in each scene we were in and talking about." That's why Stack says,
You sure she white?
Now, Mary is also part of the movie's running theme of duality. She looks white, but thanks to the racist one-drop laws in the South, anybody with a fraction of African blood was considered to be black. So Mary lives in two worlds. She's currently married to a rich white man in Arkansas, but she feels at home with the black people that she was raised with.
I didn't want to be white. I wanted to be with you.
And there's also a parallel here with the biblical Mary Magdalene. She also lived in two worlds. Judas ridiculed her for being a former prostitute, even though she had become a follower of Jesus. And then we meet Delta Slim, played by the legendary Delroy Lindo. Now, Lindo took lessons to learn how to play the blues harp and piano. And also, all the buskers at the train station are real musicians. For Sammy, Slim represents the danger of this life. He'll never get ahead economically, and he wants to drink every dollar he makes, like he says.
Sounding like me, I can't ask for more than that.
Now in the car, they drive by a work gang, and here I want to shout out a great influencer named Fantastic Frankie. Her links are below. She had a post about the historical Easter eggs in Sinners, where she talks about a practice called convict leasing. This is when black people would be arrested, sometimes on made-up charges, and then they would be sent to private companies to do work for free. This is a way that in the racist Jim Crow South, they extended slavery for several decades. So this is the story that Slim tells. He and his friend Rice were arrested and forced to play music for a white dance hall. After a big payday, his friend tried to go legit and use the money to start a church, but the Klan killed him for attempting economic upward mobility. So Slim accepted his place in the blues hall.
What'd I do with the money?
I drank it.
And then something amazing happens. When Slim hits this emotional low point and he no longer has the words to express how he feels, he starts to sing. And this moment was actually improvised by Delroy Lindo.
It came from what I was feeling in the moment, and my two colleagues in the car went with it.
This is why Miles Caton and Michael B. Jordan look a little bit confused at first.
Got that guitar in your hand, don't you, boy?
And then we go to Smoke visiting Annie and their son's grave. Now, Annie's house is painted in haint blue, a color you normally find on southern porches to keep away mosquitoes and haints, which are malevolent spirits. Wumi Mokaku's character Annie practices hoodoo, Annie's costumes are infused with hoodoo-inspired colors like haint blue. I mean, we see it in her clothes, the beads, and the feathers. Before Smoke left, she gave him a mojo bag which was filled with magical hoodoo items. And the shelf in the background has real hair care pieces and hoodoo items that the production designer found in publications from the 1930s. Now notice, when she starts talking about root working, the camera creates a lens flare and a subtle focus shift around Annie, creating a slight rainbow effect. Now this symbolizes how Annie is a source of light and knowledge in the film. Later on, she is the only person who knows what a vampire is and the rules that they have to follow.
Now we need garlic, wood, silver, and holy water.
And when she tells Smoke that she casts spells for him, listen to the sound design.
How you know I ain't brave? And work every root my grandmama taught me to keep you and that crazy brother of yours safe every day since you've been gone.
That is the same sound we hear when Delroy Slim talks about the blues being sacred later in the movie.
It's magic what we do. It's sacred.
So this implies that Annie's magic is real and it comes from a deep cultural place. Also, she tells Smoke that his money is cursed because it was obtained with blood. But remember, Sammy's guitar should be cursed as well. It belonged to their father and Smoke killed him. So this is again symbolic of how the blues is born out of real pain and suffering. And it's not something you can simply take. You know, like when Stack lied about the guitar belonging to Charlie Patton. And this is important because the vampires are also trying to take this music and make it their own. The prayer that Annie speaks over Smoke's mojo bag is in a language called Gullah Geechee, which is a very distinct African-American heritage that originated in the coastal region of the southern US. She ends her prayer over Smoke's mojo bag with the word Ashe, which is used in many tribal religious practices. The word means power, specifically the power to make things happen. And then we meet Remick fleeing from the Choctaw Tribal Police. Now, in the Spotify playlist I mentioned earlier, there is a newspaper listed for August 1st, the birthday of Jack McConnell, who plays Remick. The headline is about immigrants disappearing from a ship that arrived from Ireland, with the implication that Remick was one of the immigrants who was attacked, or he was the vampire who did the attacking. So this is a cool vampire Easter egg because in the original novel Dracula, he arrives by ship from Transylvania, and the clipping is dated 1911, meaning that Remick has been roaming the country for about 20 years. Now there's also a deleted scene between this KKK couple where they talk about fertility treatments, and we see that he already knows how to play guitar. So this music is another piece that the vampire assimilates into their hive mind. Now, these two races were actually part of the second KKK, which was formed as a reaction to the prosperity of African Americans in the early 20th century. And you'll notice that when Remick comes to this front porch, he does not speak with his native Irish accent.
I got gold. Them dirty Indians meant to rob me. They ain't get all of it, y'all can have it.
This is because, and this is true, Irish people were not actually considered to be white at this time. They were brought to America as indentured servants who were viewed as second-class citizens. Now the irony here is that he ends up appealing to their racism, but their own hatred is what ended their lives. Now the production took a lot of care to make sure that the Mississippi Choctaw were portrayed accurately in the movie, and the cultural consultant Jay Wesley has a cameo here. He is wearing a traditional beaded sash of Mississippi Choctaw warriors, and they speak the authentic Choctaw language.
I was excited to hear our language spoken because I've not seen another movie that has our language spoken correctly.
Now there was a deleted scene here that showed a montage of everybody pitching in to get the juke ready for the night. It's a nice scene that shows the hope that these people have for their future. And it also features trucks arriving at the juke at the same time, which would have been a counterpoint to the Klan arriving at the end of the movie. The first customer we see orders corn liquor, saying that the beer and wine is too fancy for him and he has to pay with wooden nickels that can be redeemed at the general store. So all of this is showing us the challenge for black people to be upwardly mobile while also servicing their community. The juke goes into the red because the brothers need to bring in outsiders who have more money. Just like how, for instance, hip-hop music became a true commercial juggernaut whenever white kids also started to buy records. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Mary, who arrives in the next scene. Mary now lives an affluent life with a white husband in Little Rock, but she wants to reject that life to be with her own people.
I didn't want to be white, I wanted to be with you.
Now they mentioned that she lives in Little Rock, Arkansas, and at the time, Little Rock was not considered part of the Deep South, and it was a place where she could more easily easily pass as white. And just 25 years after this, it was the city where 9 African Americans enrolled into an all-white school. And to protect the students from white backlash, President Eisenhower sent in the National Guard to make sure the Little Rock Nine were able to attend schools safely. Now, earlier I said that the movie follows the structure of a musical, with songs kind of manifesting from high points of emotion, but we don't always get to hear the actors literally sing. Instead, there's sometimes an eternal emotion. For instance, when Stack talks to Mary, this track is called Dangerous, but on the soundtrack, the song has lyrics sung by Haley Steinfeld. Why am I so dangerous to you? You know I want to let you in. I know what you want to do. Now, there's a double meaning here. It's sexual, but it's also referring to how she will eventually become a vampire, and they have to let her back into the juke. And this brings us to the centerpiece musical number, I Lied to You, written by Ludwig Göransson. Now, in the movie, the song is about Preacher Boy confessing a sin to his father, that he doesn't want to live the pious life, and instead he wants to play the blues.
They say the truth hurts, so I lied to you.
But then, the song transcends the singer. Delroy Slim's deleted footage from earlier reminds us of the magic in the blues.
It's magic what we do. It's sacred.
And then we replay Annie's prologue narration, showing us that Sammy is one of the griots of legend.
There are legends of people born with the gift of making music so true it can pierce the veil between life and death.
To make the music feel authentic to the time, Göransson used a vintage 1932 Dobro Cyclops guitar for the score, and especially for this number. Now notice, when Sammy starts to really tap into the deep magic, the camera's aspect ratio shifts from the 16:9 Panavision into the taller IMAX format. Coogler shot the film with both cameras, and this is actually the first major motion picture to do so.
So the film was shot with 2 different aspect ratios, and this is the first time ever that a film has been released combining these 2.
This is one of the many ways that Ryan Coogler's love for the art of filmmaking really shines. For one, shooting on film highlights how much planning and thought went into every shot. Most blockbusters today, like Marvel movies, are shot on digital because it's more convenient and cost-effective. But Sinners was entirely shot on film, meaning there was little leeway for do-overs if there was a bad take. Coogler decided to film on Ultra Panavision 70mm and IMAX formats to immerse the audience in scenes with heavy narrative significance, establishing shots, character introductions, and fight scenes. Ultra Panavision 70mm is the widest horizontal picture you can shoot on, and IMAX is the largest picture available. So for moments like this, when the picture takes up the whole screen, it's basically Coogler saying, pay attention, this is really important. Now, to show us how important this scene is, Coogler gives us a 2.5-minute long tracking shot, but the IMAX cameras could actually only shoot for about 1.5 minutes at a time. So there are a few places where the camera roams over the environment that could be digitally melded together.
Movie magic.
And the surreal montage brilliantly melds together the past, the present, and the future, like choreographer Akaman Hassani Jones says.
It hands down really was an opportunity to pay respect, honor, and put on display our ancestors.
And the scene was also a beast to put together. In addition to getting the camera movements exactly right, the actors had to hit their marks at the exact right spots. And for the entire movie, they did not film with temp tracks. Göransson composed the songs as they were going along, so the actors always knew exactly what they were dancing to.
Usually Ludwig is writing these songs after the movie's been shot. So he's working around the clock with Serena to get this song just right.
But let's talk about the meaning behind all of this. So when the aspect ratio expands, this shows us that we have to metaphorically open our eyes to a deeper truth hiding inside the music. And in this moment, the edges of the frame are blurred, like we're in a dream. And then we see an old man from West Africa emerge from the crowd playing a kora. And then when Annie says the future, the camera moves past this Jimi Hendrix-inspired rocker. The costume designer, Ruth Carter, won Oscars for Black Panther, Malcolm X, and Amistad. And now in this scene, she is just showing off. And then the camera goes to the stage and we hear the sound of that magical push again. But then that takes us to the DJ, and that magical push sound turns out to be a record scratch as he is remixing the past, the present, and the future together. And then the music kicks back in and the track becomes a full remix of all these different eras. Fuck, this is cool. So the opening line could be a reference to Kendrick Lamar's Ja, which opens with Several songs are sampled here, including You Know How We Do It by Ice Cube, I Want to Dance With Somebody by Whitney Houston, Freak Like Me by Adina Howard, but my favorite is this sample of Dre's Nothing But a G Thing, when we see these West Coast guys dancing. Honestly, there are more samples in this track than I can catch, and if we tried to play all of them, we would get demonetized. But the point of this scene is that all of these artists are part of the same story. They help us to transcend our reality and tap into something more deeper and primal. Now, showing the past and future here is vital because it shows that the vampires are not the only magic in the film. This music is rooted in the deep magic that goes back to when their people began. Now, when the remix starts, we see a breakdancer in a tracksuit from the 80s. Then the camera glides over the DJ and West African drumming to what looks like a jazz guitarist and an electric guitarist. Then two women are doing a hip-hop dance, probably from the 1990s. When the Chows join the dance, we see classic Chinese dance from the Peking era, showing us that this connection to music isn't just through Africa, it is tied to every culture on the planet. There's also a subtle detail here when we see Crips in blue bandanas dancing and men in red bandanas, the colors of the Bloods, gambling. I think that Coogler is saying that when the music is this good, it can bring everybody together. And then tribal dancing takes over the soundtrack as we see a Showtime dancer in denim. And then after the camera pulls around, this woman in red is doing a form of modern dance. Then the camera tilts up to show the burning roof, and this was actually the martini shot for the entire production. They really did set this roof on fire.
It was such a great moment that was really enjoyable for everyone because you truly marked the end of principal photography.
Why is the roof on fire? Do we need to get everybody out? No, it's on fire for a couple reasons. One, it's a metaphor for a great party. We're going to set the roof on fire. But also, it puts everybody outside, so this becomes almost like a tribal ritual. This is showing how the music is connecting them to their ancestors and the rituals of their past.
We heal our people, and we be free.
But the burning building also shows how the music has exposed them to the vampires who can now sense the power of the song. And inside, this is right when Smoke tells Stack that they are going to be broke if they can only take plantation money.
That's plantation money. 2 months, and we out of fresh cash.
So their music and this business is going to have to expand to include people from outside of their culture. The underlying meaning here is that their authentic music will become a product. The vampires have no culture of their own, so they steal it from other cultures and assimilate it into their hive mind. Now, when Remick shows up, he tries to tell them,
Can't we just, for one night, just all be family?
And he means this because, like I said earlier, for a long time the Irish were considered second-class citizens and not actually white. But also, before England colonized Africa, they colonized Ireland beginning in the 12th century. And the monarchies experienced suppressing cultures in Ireland and Scotland prepared them for the colonization of Africa, Australia, America, and India. When Remick comes to the door, he says,
"We hungry as dogs."
Which I also took as a metaphor for hungry as wolves, like they're the big bad wolf looking to blow this house down. The song they sing, Picked Poor Robin Clean, was actually written by 2 black women, Geeshie Wiley and Elvie Thomas. But the version they sing is a bluegrass cover that is very, how do I say it?
I picked poor Robin clean. Picked poor Robin clean.
The lyrics are about being so hungry that you can eat every part of a small bird. But, sung by vampires, it takes on an ominous meaning. They will pick over this culture and its people and consume its music until there's nothing original left. And this is intercut with Smoke warning Sammy not to be a musician.
I know plenty of musicians, I ain't never met a happy one.
And this scene, which falls at the almost exact midpoint of the movie, is where Smoke breaks down the central duality of the film, the sinners and the saints. He talks about how he and his brother tried to move to a town founded by freed slaves where every business was black owned, but the mayor rejected them because their dad was a sinner.
Knew he was an evil man. Figured there was no way that he ain't passed that evil down to us.
And this shows how, even within their own community, the brothers were forced into economic poverty and couldn't get ahead legally. This is why he tells Sammy to stay away from this life, just like Stack told Mary to go to Little Rock and be white, because if you stay here, you'll only get paid in plantation coin and you'll never get ahead. And this is also what drives Stack and Mary to consider inviting the vampires in, because maybe their money can help this group of sinners get just a little bit ahead on that economic ladder. So the song the vampires sang at the door was one they appropriated from 2 black artists. That's why it retained absolutely none of the soul that it was originally composed with. But when Mary approaches them, they're singing a Scottish-Irish folk song called Wild Mountain Time. Now, according to Wikipedia, the lyrics and melody are a variant of the song The Braes of Balkeither by Scottish poet Robert Tannahill and Scottish composer Robert Archibald Smith, but they were adapted by a Belfast musician named Francis McPeak. So, like any piece of real, genuine culture, the song evolved organically within its own culture.
And we'll all go together.
Now, the song's lyrics are melancholy, about leaving home and searching for a true love, but the lyrics were actually written about the Highland clearances. This is when the English forced Scottish people from their homes and erased their culture, language, and traditions. So this song is actually coming from a real, personal place for Remick. It was born out of suffering caused by the English, and it shows that he was once a victim of the same vampires that now want to steal black culture. Outside, Remick calls the gold,
It's from a different place and a different time.
and he's not talking about the coin itself, he's talking about what it represents. It's said that money is the root of all evil because it's the opposite of the communal experience that we saw in the surreal montage. Money divides people, it makes us turn on one another. Money forces people to divide their culture and let the vampires in. And as Mary speaks to them outside, inside, Perline sings the song Pale Pale Moon, with lyrics that are appropriate for a vampire. Pale moon coming, I'll wait till the sun rises, leave the day by the door. I don't care if the sun shines once more. And to draw this parallel between Perline's song and the vampires, I love this jump cut of Remick leaping to her taking the stage. Now, when Mary shows Stack the gold, he says,
They want to drink with this or something?
which is funny because, of course, they want to drink blood. The movie also cleverly follows established vampire tropes, like vulnerabilities to silver and wooden stakes, but most importantly, they need permission to enter. Now, earlier we mentioned how this was symbolic of white colonial missionaries entering new lands, but it's also symbolic of how black artists invite in white managers and white fans to make money. Now, as Perline sings the vampire song about not wanting the sun to come up, the stomping on the dance floor is intercut with the kicking of this cheater, again tying the rollicking juke joint to sins like violence. And outside, Cornbread takes a piss while the vampires watch him from the dark like animals. There was actually a deleted scene here where we see the vampire, but this is much, much scarier. And inside, as Perline prowls across the stage like an animal, Mary is starting to feast on Stack. And when Smoke shoots her exactly halfway through the runtime, this is the moment when the movie turns into a more traditional vampire film.
We're gonna kill every last one of you.
Now, as we transition into a horror film, Coogler combines the tropes of a vampire movie with a zombie movie. For instance, everybody gathers together, held up in a safe location to figure out what's going on, and they're worried that one of their own has turned. The vampires are also reimagined as having a hive mind, which is more of a trope that we see in zombie stories, but it also has a deeper symbolic meaning that I'll talk about just a little bit later. Now notice as Smoke holds Stack's body, his hands shake as his PTSD from the war is triggered. Outside, Cornbread says,
Now we is one people.
which are a variation of the words that Remick just used.
Can't we just, for one night, just all be family?
This is because Remick does want them to all be one people, one united hive mind where he can use their cultures to connect to his dead loved ones. One thing I love about this movie is how we don't waste any time with people doubting Annie or trying to figure out what's going on. Annie, the mystic, recognizes that they are up against vampires and everybody is on board. As soon as the revelation sinks in, the track In the Moonlight begins. Some of the lyrics are, live in the moonlight, dance with the devil, I wanted more, drawn to a killing floor. And also, ponder the music in each soul, where it comes and where it goes, between the dark and light. Now the lyrics are about what the vampires want, to absorb the music of people's souls, and because they're vampires, they're always hungry and wanting more. This is, of course, a metaphor for capitalism, for the way that music is turned into a product that is simply there for people to consume and profit from. Now Annie says that the haints possess people, but vampires are more frightening.
The soul gets stuck in the body. Can't rejoin the ancestors.
So what the vampires offer is a kind of cultural death that severs you from the past and future. This makes the song Remick sings earlier even sadder.
And we'll all go together.
When he sang that Irish-Scottish dirge, this was the voice of his old, human self crying out from inside the vampire's form. Now this revelation transitions the movie into a paranoid thriller, with everybody trying to figure out who the werewolf is. The scene where they eat garlic is very reminiscent of the blood testing scene from John Carpenter's The Thing, where characters try to figure out who the monster is. The Thing also employs another trick replicated in this movie. In that film, whoever is the monster has a gleam in their eyes, like there's another being living inside of their form. And for this movie, they actually developed special contact lenses that reflect light like the eyes of an animal.
The contacts themselves are the most stunning things you'll ever see. They're hand-painted.
The reflective quality that you'll see in animals' eyes sometimes at night, like a cat will look like it has glowing eyes. So he wanted to do this in the vampires.
And to make sure that we understand the rules of this vampire movie, Annie tells us that they are hurt by garlic and wooden stakes, but killing their maker won't do anything to the rest of them. This also lets the audience know that characters who turned will stay turned. So in this movie, death has stakes. And then the tension builds up to the vampires, now dozens of them, singing the Irish jig, The Rocky Road to Dublin. Now the dance number shows us what's really at stake here. The black music will be absorbed into a hive mind that will force them to assimilate into another culture. And this is the opposite of the surreal montage from earlier. There is no spiritual connection between these vampires. There's no fire, no ancestors. It is people moving around like puppets, dancing to music because they're told to. But even worse, the song ends with a chorus of black voices to show how their voices and culture have been assimilated into the vampiric hive mind. And the scariest moment is Remick dancing straight at the camera and nearly kicking the lens. And I also want to praise the makeup design in this movie done by Mike Fontaine. The level of practical effects in this film is staggering, with every character getting a unique makeup effect. Now when they constructed the effects, they wanted to make the cuts look more natural.
For the bite wounds, I was looking at animal attacks. You know, what happens when something like a shark bites someone's skin.
So to convince Smoke to join them, Remick reveals that their dream of a free and independent juke joint was never going to happen, and the dream was actually built on a lie.
This world already left you for dead. Won't let you build.
The Klan is coming in the morning to kill them all, and once again, we're seeing how the white power structures work to prevent African Americans from advancing, much like when whites bombed Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like we talked about earlier in the video. The movie also shows us a series of temptations. There's the sexual temptation to commit adultery, like we see with Pearline and Mary, but there's also Sammy's temptation later on to walk away from the blues. But in this scene, the vampires make a strong case for the others to join them.
This is the way. Together. Forever.
I also want to point out that I think the hive mind is a metaphor for the groupthink of the internet. As soon as you release anything creative or artistic online, it gets absorbed into this meta culture that reinterprets your work and then spits it right back out in 100 different remixed forms. Also, like the internet, the hive mind in the movie knows every personal detail about everybody else. You could also see a metaphor here with AI art that scrapes the entire internet hive mind to replicate the work of actual human beings, but with none of the soul. And this is why it's important that Slim stands up for Sammy.
He belongs to us. He belongs with us.
Slim is saying, you can't have this music. This music belongs to our people.
The blues weren't forced on us. At that religion, we brought this with us from home.
Outside, the choir sings Picked Poor Robin Clean, but without the jaunty bluegrass backup, so now it just sounds ominous, as the vampires are promising to devour everybody inside.
I'll be satisfied having a family.
After Grace invites them in, notice the frame expands into IMAX view right when they charge. Now, I would love to break down every nuance and swing and piercing in this fight, but it's actually so bloody that the video would get immediately demonetized. But I will point out a few key moments. Grace immediately goes after Bo, and they die together in a fire. And in the middle of all this carnage, something really tragic happens. After Smoke kills Annie, Mary screams, "Annie!" Now, there is a deleted scene between Mary and Annie that shows their close relationship, and earlier Annie calls Mary family.
She here, because she family.
Now, Mary is distraught by Annie's death because it means that she is really gone and she can't join their collective. It shows how a portion of the human beings is still alive inside of their vampire form, and they still long for connection, but it's connection that is achieved through conformity. Then Slim sacrifices himself for everybody else, getting swarmed while he is in a crucifix pose. Much like Jesus, Slim is dying for the sins of others to protect them from evil. So the twins fight one another as Sammy flees toward the sun, and these two confrontations highlight the duality of life and death. Two brothers fight, one alive, one dead, while Sammy's music represents life, connecting people to their ancestors, but Remick represents the death of that connection and the death of individuality.
I want your stories, and I want your songs, and you won't have mine.
And then Sammy leans on his church upbringing and invokes the Lord's Prayer.
Our Father,
which art in heaven.
Now, in many traditional vampire stories, they're warded off by symbols of Christianity, like holy water or the cross. Similarly, there was a belief that haints could not cross water, which is why porches were painted with haint blue. But Remick disproves this and reveals that he also has a personal connection to the Lord's Prayer.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Long ago, the man who stole my father's land forced these words upon us.
Remick being forced into Christianity is reminding us of the original sin of colonization. Now, of course, there is nothing wrong with people converting to Christianity if they choose to, but colonizers, like the people who took Remick's land, did not give natives a choice. They forced religion upon them, causing them to sever ties with their own culture. And so he forces Sammy into a baptism, kind of like when Flanders tried to baptize the Simpson kids. Again, there's nothing wrong with a baptism, but a forced baptism is the worst kind of sin because it uses the word of God and religion to gain political power and control. Now, makeup designer Mike Fontaine said that in his mind, Remick's human form is actually the disguise, but in this end scene, he is showing his true nature, more like an animal that wants to devour Sammy's soul. Meanwhile, Smoke apologizes.
Sorry I couldn't keep you safe. Don't be sorry. You always did.
And remember, the first person that Smoke ever killed was their father because he used to abuse Stack. Throughout his life, Smoke is the protector who guards the people he loves. It's one of the reasons the death of his son hit him so hard, because he wasn't able to protect him. Oh, also, and while they were shooting this scene, a 7-foot-long alligator showed up on set and they had to haul it away.
Yeah. One time we were shooting by water, and Ryan goes, "Cut, there's an alligator just
right there."
Oh, okay, yeah, no, we should cut.
We should get out the water.
Now, back to the forced baptism where Sammy fights back with his guitar. In other words, he was saved by the blues. But this is also a moment of personal sacrifice. He is destroying something sacred to him, the guitar. And he's saying, you can never have this music. I'd rather destroy it than hand it over to you. It also establishes the tradition of musicians who destroy their instruments at the end of their shows, which is another way of saying this performance is one of a kind and can never be replicated. But Sammy can't win alone, and he needs help from his family. That's why Smoke has to strike the killing blow with a wooden stake. Now, as the vampires burn, the score sounds almost like a church choir. And this is followed by a sad fiddle, which I think is the remainder of Remick's human soul finally being released. And then we cut from the IMAX to the Panavision camera. Sammy helps Smoke get the weapons out of the trunk, which they did mention earlier.
Shit, we forgot the trunk. Man, why ain't you remind me? Fool, I told you to remind me.
And then Smoke tells him once again to leave this life behind. But Sammy holds onto the neck of the guitar and drives Stack's car home. And remember, when he asked to drive earlier, Stack said,
"Why you want to drive?"
Oh, you know I want to drive.
Later. On the way back.
And now Sammy is driving the car back to the first scene in the movie. And to show how Smoke is lost without his brother, he can't roll a cigarette by himself. And then he remembers that key first shot that we talked about when Stack hands him a rolled cigarette. And then Smoke flashes back to that deleted montage of his friends and family building up the juke joint. This is when he decides to fight another White Devil, the Ku Klux Klan. Now, when the Klan arrives, it is closely intercut with Sammy entering the church door to face his final temptation. The temptation to walk away from a life of playing the blues and exchange it for a life of safety and comfort. Both scenes are about trying to end a cultural movement. Sammy's dad doesn't want him to play the blues.
Drop the guitar, Samuel.
And the Klan wants to stop African Americans from prospering. But then Smoke puts his war training to good use. Notice, by the way, these are World War I era dog tags around his neck. Now, the guns in this scene are actually able to shoot without live rounds, but they still have the recoil of real weapons.
We use the technology that was recently developed for our prop guns to make it safer for the actors. There's no projectile and the gas, that pumps to make it look live.
During the fight, Smoke takes a shot in the side, like the Roman spear that pierced Jesus. And I think this is a deliberate illusion. Smoke could have walked away, but instead, he removed his mojo bag and gave his life to stop the Klan. Now, the parallel here with Jesus is that in the eyes of the Pharisees of his day, he too was seen as a sinner. He hung out with tax collectors and prostitutes, so he was viewed as somebody who was not of proper society. And as the channel Heavy Spoilers points out, Stack was probably hiding inside to stay out of the sun. So Smoke sacrificed his life to protect his brother one last time. And this happens just as Sammy decides to be true to himself and keep playing the blues. In this final sequence, pay attention to the color palette at play. The production design is based on 3 primary colors: red, white, and blue.
It plays into our color story, Red, White, and Blue, because this is sort of a place where people saw hedonism and drinking, prohibition was going on.
This is expressed through the twins' clothing, but also every character wears some form of red, white, or blue. Red is also associated with the juke. Remember, the sign was painted in red, and the lighting inside gives the space an orange-reddish hue, while the vampires are seen outside in the blue moonlight. Meanwhile, all the institutions, like the buildings in town and the church, are painted white. But most importantly, in the end, red becomes the predominant color. Smoke normally wears blue, but now his clothes are stained red, and Sammy drives a red car. So red, the color of the juke joint, the color of the sinners, ends up being the dominant color in the film. But in the end, Annie appears in a white dress to show that her spirit is pure and cleansed. White, in some African cultures, is worn at a funeral as a celebration of life, which is what Annie is doing in this moment. She is showing Elijah his son. Now she says,
I don't want any of that smoke to get on her.
And this is an important moment. It's when Elijah sheds his gangster nickname, Smoke, for his true name. It's when his spirit is at rest and he can finally be with his son. And when Sammy drives away, this is another riff on a horror movie trope. This is an homage to the final girl motif, which started way back in the classic '74 horror film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we see it all the time in horror films now. Halloween, The Strangers Pray at Night, and A Violent Nature, and even Get Out. This moment is often a release in the film, the final girl leaving the bloodshed behind. But we know where Sammy ends back up, right at the beginning of the movie, adding to Coogler's theme about the connection between time and music and culture. Sammy has escaped from that singular moment at the club, but we know that his story isn't nearly over. And then we flash forward to 60 years in the future, October 16th, 1992 in Chicago. This is actually weirdly the same day that another Chicago-based horror film dropped, Candyman. The two films, while set in entirely different decades, are similar in their narratives. Candyman and Sinners both show through monstrous mythos the exploitation that Black Americans go through. Whether it be the Candyman or the vampires, the use of the monsters in these two films allow the audience to visualize the very real systemic terrors in our world. Older Sammy is played by the absolute GOAT, Buddy Guy. I mean, Jimi Hendrix called this guy a legend. Not only is this an incredible cameo, but Guy actually helped to guide both Coogler and Ludwig Göransson with some of the musical ideas for their blues score. In an interview with Variety, Guy said that his appearance was more than just a cameo for him, telling his grandchildren, "Man, if you outlive me, just try to keep the blues alive." In a meta way, this is everything that Ryan Coogler is asking for. Sinners shows us the connectivity of music and how important it is to keep your culture songs alive. In fact, when they filmed this scene, Guy played an impromptu concert for the cast and crew.
Out of nowhere, Buddy starts playing an impromptu blues concert, and everyone immediately put their gear down, and we started rocking out and just enjoying this incredible opportunity to see Buddy go at it.
Now, in the mid-credits scene, Sammy lets the vampires in because they have money to spend, the same reason they were considering letting Remick in 60 years before. And we see that Mary and Stack survived. Now, Stack can smell the death on Sammy, and he gives him one last temptation.
I can make it so you can stick around. Keep touring. Keep living. No pain.
And Sammy gives him the perfect response.
I think I've seen enough of this place.
And then Stack says that he prefers acoustic guitar, saying,
I don't like that electric shit as much as the real. Yeah, I miss the real.
And here, I don't think he's just talking about the music. He is talking about life. He misses the sun. He misses his family. He misses being a real man. So Sammy plays him the song Traveling, also the first song that he played for him in the car.
Traveling, I don't know where the world I'm in.
And before he leaves, they both agree that that day the Juke opened was the best day of their lives. It was the day when Sammy was opened up to a larger world, when he saw a deeper truth in the universe. And for Stack,
last time I see my brother, I love you. Last time I seen the sun.
And most importantly, he talks about the day as the fulfillment of their dream.
Early in this morning, just for a few hours, it was free.
Now this line ultimately boils the movie down to hope. When African Americans suffered under slavery or Jim Crow laws or other racist institutions, they used that darkness to create the blues. But the blues is about creating something beautiful from that darkness. Ultimately, this music is about hope. And this is reflected in the end credit song, Last Time I Seen the Sun. The lyrics go, and if I am screaming, please don't wake me up. Guys, I have to thank Ryan Coogler and his team for creating an incredible film for us to write about.
We love you so much. I literally love you the most.
And a very special shout out to all the former and current ScreenCrush staff members who helped contribute ideas, their words, and their edits in this video. I am so proud that we made this together as a team. But what did you guys think of Centers? Let us know in the comments below or on our free to join Discord server. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.